All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Danch. I'm the Executive Director of the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council, and my assistant, Callie O'Connor, was there at the helm of the computer. It has some other introductions, which I will allow Jensen Hughes to make.
Hi, evening, everyone. I'm Darlene Reaney. I am a director with Jensen Hughes. I'm also a fire safety engineer and wildfire resiliency planner. I guess for those of you who don't know who Jensen Hughes is, we're a fire engineering, fire science, and risk consulting firm. And for this project, we've been commissioned by Chris and the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council to provide our domain expertise, some of our knowledge and experience doing wildfire risk mitigation and other type of resiliency planning, but also to provide a suite of technical tools and resources to better understand the wildfire hazards and risks and vulnerabilities across the Ojai Valley region, not just in the natural environment, but also in the built environment and in the people domain. And hopefully these sort of tools and resources will help in decision making as well as action planning as you sort of go through your development process for your community plan.
Hi everyone. I'm Megan Joy. I'm also with Jensen Hughes. I'm a consultant out of our Los Angeles office and working in a project management role on the CWPP. Hi all, I'm Amelia. I'm also with Jensen Hughes and I'm handling the demographic and some of the geospatial analysis.
Hi, and I'm Dave Kerr, and I'm not with Jensen Hughes, but I'm subcontracting to them. I'm a former Forest Service employee, 33 years on the field while on fire. Used to be the division chief here in Ojai and Fraser Park, and actually did a term as the acting fire chief on the Los Padres for a while. So I'm doing primarily the fire behavior modeling, but also kind of leading up the action planning efforts for the various planning units that we're looking at.
Would you like to introduce the other members of the team that are not here, David? Okay.
Sure. So down on the bottom row, Dr. Crystal Colden, she's at UC Merced. She used to be a Forest Service employee, but decided to move into academia. She's handling the climate change portion of the CWPP. The gentleman in the middle is Tim Metzger. He's basically my counterpart from the Northern Rockies. He's another refugee from the Forest Service, but more comfortable in timbered landscapes in that part of the world. And the other gentleman down there is a Jensen Hughes employee, and that's Jonathan Hughes, and he's doing some of the geospatial analysis as well for the project.
We're going to start with some of the general terms of a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or CWPP, looking at what we're trying to do with this particular plan for the Ojai Valley and the surrounding area. At that point, we will turn it over to Jensen Hughes. We'll talk a little about the methodology, make some sense of the maps that are around the room that have been produced in the beginning of the data collection and analysis, and describe more of their role. We'll go into a Q&A session, and feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions you want. We'll take a short break if we need it. Then we're going to go into an interactive activity, which Callie will be leading, and give a chance to voice concerns about what is working, what's not working. In the second half of the activity will be to talk about how do we start ideas to address those concerns. And then we'll conclude with more of the philosophy behind, very short description of the philosophy behind this CWP, and that would be to build a culture of resiliency in the Ojai Valley. And they'll end with a Q&A. Next. We have a core working group for this project. Obviously, that is the Fire Safe Council, is Jensen Hughes, and Ventura County Fire Protection District. Primary participants, we'll get to that, is Celine Mumi, our pre-fire specialist in the county, also our CAL FIRE liaison, and then Larry Williams, our fire prevention officer. In the back, we have Bob Welsby, who is the battalion chief of the Ojai Station for tonight only. And if you see him jump up and leave, it's because he is actually on active duty right now. So appreciate him being there. And we also are in consultation with the Forest Service. They were actually out in force last night. So we meet directly with them. Obviously, that's an important partner in this because half the land mass of the county is national forest. So this is very, want this to be informal, interactive. Feel free to, when in the Q&A, just to have discussions about this. And obviously just, try to keep focused on, the thing at hand and explain yourself and just the usual rules of good discourse. This workshop, as you can see, is being recorded and will be available on our dedicated website for this project. And we are planning in early March a virtual version of this workshop as well. So today's workshop, why are we here? Obviously, a little bit of understanding the CWP process, talk about what we're doing and your participation in the process, and then move into the interactive activity. Next. So what is a CWPP? Well, it's a document that's prepared under a federal framework that's been developed with the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. Now, there are 3 minimum components required. Obviously, a collaboration between communities, other stakeholders, and the agencies involved. Identifies and prioritizes areas for hazardous fuel reduction, and then it also recommends measures to reduce ignitability of structures. Now, we are going to deal with all of those, but we're planning on much more than this. We're looking at a holistic, comprehensive risk mitigation strategy for wildfire for our community. You can see our planning area is not just the Ojai, though it says the Ojai Valley CWPP. So it's about 360 square miles. It extends along from Foster Park, Casilla Springs, up along the watershed, the northern portions up by Rose Valley, down the other side of the watershed, and over to basically Santa Paula and along the foothills in West Ventura. We have such an area because we are looking at issues such as our grazing program. We're also looking at evacuation considerations, so it takes a much larger area to cover. We will, in the CWP, we'll look obviously at defining values, assets, ranking those values. That's one of the ways that community input's really important to us. What are your values? So talking in workshops like this, sending us comments by email, and also taking the online survey, which we're encouraging everybody to do who lives or works in the planning area. That helps us understand what people care about, what are their concerns, and also helps us very much prioritize that in an action plan, which will be at the end of the CWPP. We're going to be looking at reassessing wildfire hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities, obviously agreeing on priorities, balance of the action to be taken over a 10-year action plan. We'll help to guide the community based on your input, prioritizing projects, actions, vulnerable groups, etc. Want to increase the transparency of what's going on. We want to improve the educational resources, which is a big role for fire safe councils. Strengthen our partnerships and improve stakeholder coordination. And then the one I went by is increase funding opportunities. And that is one of the most important things, obviously, surprisingly about a CWP, that funders across the country, they recognize that framework of a CWPP. And many funders for wildfire grants actually require you to have a CWPP and putting you at the priority at the top. That they want you to be able to point page and paragraph as to how you arrived at that project and why you're giving it the priority you're giving it. So obviously we're not doing this just for that, but it is a key point about a CWP is that it allows us to, it strengthens our ability considerably to go out and get funding for the action plan we eventually develop. How will it help you better to understand what's happening here, the risks and the hazards, looking at issues of defensible space and structure hardening. We are in Ventura County, which has been a leader in the state forever about defensible space, and they have an excellent program, and that just, that has been a big thing in this county. And a model for the rest of the state. And providing resources for creating an emergency plan. We have that on our website now. We intend on improving that and increasing the outreach. And at the bottom there, we want to create a more resilient community. What does that mean? We'll be talking about that throughout the plan a little bit tonight. And one way I like to say it is we would like to have us become a truly fire-adapted community and a fire-dependent ecosystem. And we look at what it takes to be a truly fire adapted community, makes you an overall more resilient community. So we're looking at a holistic strategy. Obviously, you see there's many considerations. They're all tied together eventually. And the broad areas is prevention, mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery. That has a holistic, risk-informed mitigation plan. And we have a number of supporting projects behind this. And one is our fine-scale risk mapping. The CAL FIRE maps, to put it bluntly, don't have the granularity for local planning. And so we need to do that in our area to better understand the risk and how to deal with those. And we gave an illustration that project covers at least those areas that are highlighted in blue. Next. The next one is EmberCast Modeling and Mapping Project. That's being funded by Ventura County Fire Protection District. That is actually countywide, not just within our planning area, but obviously provides the information there of wildfire behavior modeling, et cetera. Next. We also are doing a wildfire vulnerability and evacuation assessment, which will also do some, which we'll not talk much tonight. On the site is more detailed descriptions of what these projects are all about. But obviously it covers all those areas. We also have one of our flagship programs to the community is our community supported prescribed grazing program. Started 2 years ago, been very successful and growing. And we're looking at bringing prescribed grazing as an important vegetation management tool at the landscape level is our goal in that program. And then finally, we all are in partnership with the Ventura Regional Fire Safe Council on a home hardening initiative that's countywide. We're focusing on the Ojai Valley on our part with their liaison that is in the Ventura River watershed, covers those areas. And we're also trying to take data from this and design another project that will move towards the insurance issue and risk scoring for insurance companies. So we're moving towards that. We're not there yet, but that's also a very important thing to people. Insurance is a crisis in the Southwest. And then you put those all together, and pretty much covers it, except forensics down there. Now, the risk scoring tool may involve that, and if you want, Darlene can explain more about that. But so, obviously, we live in a very high fire hazard zone. We're like the poster child for being in the fire hazard, right? We have all of this that we have, and Headwaters Economics in their paper a couple years ago put us at the top 1% of the nation at risk for wildfire and top 3% in California. So we have the topography, we have the hot, dry sand and winds, we have all the zones that are in red, we have limited evacuation routes, we have building standard stock. We have communication dead zones. We also have, most people don't realize, we have a very high vulnerable grid problem, is that we are in what's called a utility load pocket, which means the main line comes over Sulphur Mountain, terminates in the valley. If that is damaged for any reason, then we could have catastrophic grid failure. Next. We also work extensively with partners. That is going in all our activities, and we have very engaged partnerships that in nonprofits and education and public safety agencies. We will be forming a series of steering groups in various areas like education, business, tourism, things like that, and bring people in to actually have talk about their particular concerns, what their needs are, and their ideas about what to do about it. So those will be starting. An example is that we work with Help of Ojai and looking at what's called the AFN population because they're one of the most hands-on in the valley. Well, here's where we get into sort of this cultural shift that we're talking about. And I'll begin by saying that many CWPs that are done at this scale, this area, this number of people, et cetera, they're very often agency-driven. There's nothing wrong about that. It's just agency-driven, has the agency perspective. The action plan ends up being what the agency is going to do. Our goal as a community-based organization is to increase the community capacity to help ourselves and help each other, in addition to the public safety agencies. And in catastrophic fires, as we call them, then one of the factors that determines it is that the public safety agencies are overwhelmed for a period of time. So that's what our plan is doing. We're not in the suppression business, so we're looking at more of what is our adaptive responses to the inevitability of fire and the inevitability of another catastrophic fire at some point. We as a community are not looking at what's out there, we're looking what's here and looking out. How do we harden our community and better prepare it, more community self-reliance, and then building again that culture of resiliency. Now, dealing with so many elements that a holistic approach entails, then we do avail ourselves of various frameworks. One of the frameworks that we are using to help keep ourselves organized and keep all this information in perspective is this Pathways tool developed by the Fire Adapted Learning Communities Network. And this is a result of 20 years of experience and research about how different kinds of communities have different concerns, capacities, and approaches to this issue. And it kind of helps us keep it organized and keep it focused and spend time on stuff that really, in experience and research shows it was most likely going to affect our kinds of communities. We do have a very diverse area, right? We have city areas, we have rural, et cetera. But we are using frameworks to help guide us. Development process, you have we are here down there at the first 1 and 2 workshops. Obviously, it's a detailed process, has many steps. We'll have another set of public workshops later in the year that's going to be looking at the draft of the CWPP. You get public comment during that period of time. Anywhere in this process, you can contact us by email, come by the office, whatever, and send in questions, comments, whatever you want to do. We do take those in, and we do pay attention to that. The end result of this will be a final CWP that is approved by various agencies and signed off. So it's going to be the County of Ventura, Matt's office. It's going to be City of Ojai. It's going to be Ventura County Fire Protection District, CAL FIRE, and the Forest Service will be the agencies approving this CWPP. And along this way, please take our survey that's online if you haven't already done so. That information is really important to us. And then we're at that spot right now with the 2 workshops and the survey. And then next, our timeline, we started this project in late November of last year. It's approximately 16 months to completion, so we're looking at a completion date in March of 2024 at the latest. And with that, we're going to move to an activity after Jensen Hughes presents about their involvement and their methodology. And you will take it, David?
I will.
Thank you.
So my role basically this evening is to kind of share some of the pre-work that Jensen Hughes has been doing to try to understand what the fire issue is around the Ojai Valley and the planning area in general. So Kelly, go ahead and kick off the first one. So some of the things we're starting to look at is what's fire history tell us about fire in the Ojai Valley? Well, we got this big red blob over on the left-hand side of the screen as the Thomas Fire. But what that fire history does is mask everything that's underneath it. So over on the wall, immediately next to the one with the big red blob, is the other fire history for the Ojai Valley. It's a fire environment that doesn't have high-frequency fires, but it tends to have very large fires, and it tends to have fires that burn into Ojai and not out of Ojai. So if you go back a few years, 2006, it was the Day Fire. Actually started over on Interstate 5, burned all the way across the Sespe Wilderness, finally chucked up just in Santa Paula Canyon before it got to the community. You can go back to 2002 and the Wolf Fire, and it burned across the top out of Piedras Blancas, and it stopped up on Nordhoff Ridge. So these are the things that the Thomas Fire burned through. Okay? So we're in that kind of time period right now where we're transitioning from, low fuel flammability post-Thomas Fire. We're getting back to that age class of our vegetation again that's going to start to begin to support more intense and larger fires. So besides just fire history, we can take a look at the ignition history that we have available up here well, and that's what the picture on the right is. Ignition density. So there are hotspots here in the Ojai Valley that tends to have a higher density of ignitions. Why is that important to us? Well, maybe that guides fire prevention actions in those particular locations. So this actually goes back to the database from 1900. So we're actually looking at more than 100 years of ignition data that's available. Is every fire captured? Of course not, but it gives us a pretty good representation of where we might want to look as far as directing prevention activities across the valley. This is probably more important than the true fire history maps itself, and this is a burn frequency map. So how often has an acre of ground around Ojai burned? So when you look at the reds and oranges, you're looking at acres of land that have burned 8 times in recorded fire history. So since 1925, I believe this map dates back to present. So those red areas kind of guide us and say, something about that western side of the Ojai Valley tends to support more fire than some of these other areas down by Foster Park and what have you. So we have to concentrate efforts in there. What's driving that particular behavior from fire in that particular zone? But these are some of the things that the modeling allows us to take a look at and historical fire activity allows us to take a look at. Okay. So we wanted to kind of show what is the probability of a fire affecting the particular valley. So on the left, we used the fuel conditions before the Thomas fire. And there's a burn probability model that basically puts random ignitions out on the landscape and allows these ignitions to burn until the entire landscape at one point in time or another has had fire touch it. So the areas in red there are high frequency visitations to fires. And the areas that are shaded in the more cool colors, the yellow and blues, have fire visit those particular areas less frequently. So as you transition into post-Thomas fire, now the fuel models have changed, the vegetation has changed, and we have a lot lower probability of fire visiting any piece of ground currently. This is based on the current vegetation. The one on the left is 2020 vegetation data. We pulled 97th percentile weather information, put a northeast wind on it, so it burned under an offshore wind type of situation. And then the model assigns where the actual ignitions occur. They occur randomly across the landscape every time the model runs it. So I believe it was 1,032 fires on the left, and it was like 2,700 fires on the right in order to burn the entire landscape. So we're just in a less flammable situation currently, but there's a continuum. You know, time is not static, vegetation is not static, and we're moving from this relative time period of lower fuel flammability to somewhere down the road, 5, 10, 20, 35 years from now, where we'll have the exact same vegetative conditions as the Thomas fire, as long as there's not more fire disturbance on the landscape. This one just shows fire intensity. Once again, pre-Thomas fire on the left side shows the size of the flame lengths that would be produced under this weather situation, 97th percentile, dry vegetation, fully cured, live fuel moisture is down very low. This is the type of fire activity we would expect. And flame length is just a fancy word for how tall the flames are. Okay? And then we look at the 2020 landscape, and obviously we're in this point where fire intensity at this point in time is not as great as what we would expect before the Thomas fire visited the landscape here. So we would like to take action now when fuel flammability is lower and vegetation is smaller. It's easier to manipulate at this time than if we were to wait 10 or 15 years and that chaparral grows back in, becomes more contiguous. So we asked Crystal Colden, Dr. Colden up at UC Merced, to kind of give us some bullet points. We know we're in a period, pretty much everybody agrees, that things are happening with our climate that are different than what we grew up with. Okay? So I asked Crystal, can you give me 3 bullet points that I can share with the crowd about life on the Central Coast? And she says, sure, there's 3 things happening to the climate here. Summer and fall temperatures are both increasing. So your summers are warmer, your falls are warmer. What does that mean? It means your fuels are drier. Okay? So drier fuels lead to greater fuel flammability, more rapid fire spread. The second thing is your marine layer is getting squashed. Okay? It's not as deep, doesn't push as far inland as it used to, doesn't persist as long in the day. So there's a trend line that shows that the marine layer along the central coast is decreasing. And then lastly, precipitation. Precipitation is becoming less frequent, but it's becoming more intense. Okay? So you may get large quantities of rain, but you get them in short periods of time, which isn't really as useful for the fuels in order for them to absorb that amount of moisture in there. They'd rather have that precipitation delivered over a longer duration than these short, high-intensity storms. So basically, when you sum all these things up, and the next one, Callie, is we're changing the potential for extreme fire days and fire activity in the Ojai area. So this was one of Crystal's slides. I just decided, well, I'm going to keep this one. It's kind of scientific looking, but basically the first line over on the far left looked at historically, what do we know about extreme fire danger days in the Ojai Valley from 1971 to 2000? Well, there were 11 of them, and we can count those just by going back and looking at fire history, fire danger records for that. The next period, 2010 to 2039, is modeled for an average of 12 extreme fire days, but potentially up to 17. So we're continuing to increase the number of extreme fire danger days in the Ojai Valley. And then lastly, as we move past 2039, we're all the way up to a potential of 22 extreme fire days. So basically doubling the number of extreme fire danger days in the Ojai Valley as we move farther out the years ahead. So to sum it up in really quick layman's terms is fire behavior, fire danger in the Ojai Valley is increasing. And we have to take actions, or should consider taking actions now that will allow us to harden our homes, protect the values at risk, protect both natural and human values across the landscape. So that's what the plan focuses on when it starts to look at action plans and things that can be done to protect both human and natural resources. Just one more. So spend a little bit of time driving around, just looking at things here in the Ojai Valley, things that might be of concern to people. This is Matilaha Canyon, wood-sided homes down off the side of the road, lots of oak debris over it, limbs that overhang the house, overhang the chimney. Doesn't actually meet any of the California Public Resource Code requirements for defensible space. But this house is in a highly vulnerable area, and not only is it in a vulnerable area, but it's in a very difficult place to get people in and out of. And it's difficult to want to assign fire equipment back into a place like Matilaha Canyon, a dead-end canyon, during high fire activity times. You can put people back there, but you need to understand that they need a safe place to go if they can't actually exit out of the canyon mouth. So the next one, this is also taking a look at parcel level risk or individual home risk. This is Meditation Mountain, and you can see the effects of the vegetation around Meditation Mountain, fairly light, fairly scattered chaparral fuels around there, but the actual retreat itself is surrounded by pepper trees that reach down to the ground. So they built a fire environment around that particular facility that will support more active fire spread, greater intensities. So why would you, as a parcel owner, want to invite fire to burn hotter around your particular location? So there are actions that they could take out at that, as simple as pruning up their trees, lifting the branches of the pepper trees up so that they're off the ground, so that we don't get that connection of a surface fire into the canopy fuels. So simple actions that individual parcel owners can do to reduce fire risk. Kelly, the next one. So this is Oakview. This is off of Encinos Drive, but it's an aerial look at it. When you drive through Creek Road and turn onto Encinos and drive up through there, it looks really nice. They're new construction, they're very fire-safe homes, but when you look at Google Earth and stare down at that same community, you can see the intermix of wildland vegetation in between these structures. So individual structures may have their defensible space, and they may meet the public resource requirements. But what would be really cool if neighbors and neighbors could come together and say, hey, I got a problem, I need to protect from fire, you have a problem, we need to protect from fire. Maybe we should not be so excited about our property lines, and we can work together to build a community level defensible space. So that would be a situation where adjacent homeowners come together to develop a broader level defensible space than any individual in that neighborhood could get. And Ventura County is really great because they allow people to go cross property lines to develop defensible spaces. It's one of the few places in California that I'm aware of where they actually require that as far as actions go. But on these larger parcels, your 100-foot clearance may not even reach out to your property line. So is there a way that neighbors can partner together to increase a community level defensible space? This is just a Meadows Preserve, very beautiful place, nice place to go hiking. I'm sure people that come to Ojai walk around through there, but it's also an area where high public use, high recreation use, high ignition potential. And beyond that, it's also an area of wildland fuels right in the heart of the city. So if you have a fire on the outskirts of Ojai, but you have ember production, it's a receptive fuel bed for embers into the city. And immediately adjacent to Meadows, along the tree line back there, is a series of houses on, I think it's Tamarindo Lane or so. So those homeowners need to be aware that they're adjacent to wildland fuels. What actions can they take on their particular property that could help isolate a fire if it was to get established in the preserve to protect their particular home? Access and egress is a big deal around here. Lots and lots of different places. My favorite one was the one on the lower right there. There's about 17 different address signs kind of nailed up to posts and trees pointing in various different directions. This was up by Thatcher School. Just a very confusing area. You have to remember, if you have a large wildfire, the people that come here aren't going to be local. They're not going to know their way around. You may get a fire engine from La Puente, or you may get a fire engine from the Mendocino National Forest, and they don't know their way around Ojai. And as good as Google Maps is at directing you around, tonight I ended up on a dead-end road trying to get to this particular location because Google Maps told me to turn right here. So Google Maps always doesn't get you where you want to go. So clear signage, good access and egress, brushing back along road sides so that emergency responders want to be there rather than going back on that road and go, wow, the vegetation's right next to the road. If this catches fire, it's going to be pretty intense. If I can cut that back 10 feet on either side of a road system, I make that a much more inviting situation for firefighters to be in. And I think the last one here is the need to protect utility infrastructure. And Chris talked about how vulnerable utilities are here in the Ojai Valley. This is right off of Highway 33. It's a series of transmissions, distribution lines, drops down to the community, so electrical drops down to individual houses. But the big transmission tower also has a bunch of cell phone equipment on it. So if any of that becomes compromised in a wildfire, not only do you lose your electricity, but also you lose some of your ability to communicate. So these are important features that we're looking at on the landscape as far as hardening from a wildfire standpoint.
We've had some very real examples of the changing climate in the last few years. Take the Thomas Fire, for example. I'm an Ojai native, so I've been around and seen a lot here. And we take the Wheeler Fire 35 years earlier, and it burned the same fuel load. In fact, it was an older stand of chaparral that burned, but the same fuel load or more. And yet those two events were radically different to experience and what it did to the landscape and what it did to our communities. Likewise, in the recent storm, as an example of just what happened. So I'm up on North Fork Springs Road, like how to expose yourself to the maximum danger of wilderness in the wildland-urban interface. We did this where we live. And you know, we already had a season's worth of rain before the last storm hit, and we had 3 separate gauges on North Fork Springs Road in an 18-hour period record 22 plus inches of rain. Never seen. I've been up through 2 El Niños on that property. Never seen even like 84 inches for 2005. We had 7 feet of rain up there. Nothing like we just got. So I'm not saying that that's proof of anything, but these things, when they happen, they tend to do a lot of damage. The other thing that the CWP is going to do is have a lot of strategies on education. This Fire Safe Council has got a long, successful history of education, helping people with defensible space, either meet their requirements or enhance their defensible space. We intend to continue that tradition, but we're also looking at other areas that haven't been touched upon as much. Up north, for example, most fires are started by lightning. Down here, it's almost entirely human ignition. And a lot of those fires occur where they start in the flashy annual grasses, and then that takes it quickly to the chaparral. So people throwing stuff out the car, whatever it is, along roadways. So you have to look at those strategies on looking at vegetation management along those kinds of areas, but also educating and talking with people about how to prevent ignitions in the first place. Another holistic approach that we're looking at involves our prescribed grazing program. One of the major goals of that program is to create what we call a wildfire intensity reduction zone in grassy areas that extend from Upper Ojai, down along the Ojai Valley, and down the Ventura River watershed toward Foster Park and Casitas Springs. Look to annually graze somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 acres at a minimum to keep those flashy fuels down. What's that do? One, it reduces the ignitability in those areas because the animals have reduced the fuel load of those flashy fuels that are easily ignited. It also reduces the spread of that fire if it starts there because of the reduced fuel loads, keeps down the flame height, which allows first responders better to do something about it. And of course, all the arrangements with landowners and everything else has to do with more access and more cooperation and better facilities and infrastructure in place to do something that in that so-called corridor that we're talking about, the super goat highway, as some people have called it. So, but there's more than that. Properly prescribed grazing, which is the use of grazing as a tool for land management objectives, as opposed to putting animals out till they graze it to the ground for stock production. It's very different. Properly done, there is a growing body of evidence that shows that actually improves the ecology of the area as well. So there's better water infiltration, there's more carbon in the soil that holds the water. These types of things, we're aiming to get research funded to more and more show that to be the case, or what kind of practices lead to the best results. There's a little bit of a lack of research in chaparral and coastal shrublands, ecosystems. But for example, if we can improve that through this on a level that big, then when we get these big storms, the ground has a better chance of absorbing more of it and not having this runoff and all the erosion and debris flow. We're hoping this is the start of a conversation that's going to take place the entire length of this and beyond, because this is not a static document. We're successful in putting this together, then it's going to hopefully be what people call a living document, correct? Where it keeps coming back and it gets the communication and interaction and cohesion that we're seeking. Going into this culture of resiliency, we're going to be looking a lot at this during this process. Research and experience has shown that in large-scale events, catastrophic events, that the number one thing that helps a community respond better and recover faster is those communities that have a lot of social capital. The non-monetary capital is very important, and that's social ties, that's social networks, that's neighborhood communication. Then, a lot of people are saved by this. The recovery goes faster. We have a lot of that already in our valley, but I think it can become a little more coordinated and guided about how we do this. But we're really looking on ways, and we're also looking for ideas on how to build this social capital, which actually is proving to be more important in catastrophic events than technology or anything else, in terms of how people fare during the response to the incident and to the recovery from that. So we'll be looking at that as a community-driven, community-focused plan. And that is the end, and thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate it. Your participation is critical for this. And please spread the word and have people get involved. I hope you learned something tonight about what we're doing and would like to continue, and it'll help us get the word out, and because the channels are opened.